Next, we will talk about aligning IEPs to grade level and writing annual goals and objectives. This may be challenging for many of you. I know it was for me as a classroom teacher, especially if you're used to thinking about what learners can't do instead of what they can do. Earlier in this training, you learned about the least dangerous assumption and the importance of having high expectations for your students. For the next few minutes, I want you to let that outdated and unhelpful developmental model go, the one that says students aren't ready or can't learn, and presume that your students can learn if given quality instruction. First, let's look at the individual components of alignment, and then we'll consider how they relate to each other. For us who teach students with extensive support needs, the general curriculum are the extended content standards that are linked to the general education standards. The instruction is a combination of prioritized, grade-aligned academic goals, as well as life skills, communication, and therapy goals. The assessment is the Extend 1, an alternate assessment based on alternate achievement standards. The Extend 1 assesses learners on the extended content standards for their grade. So for students to show what they know on the assessment, they need quality instruction on this content. You wouldn't expect to do well on a driver's test if you never practice parallel parking. It's the same for our students. Your instruction must be grade aligned so that they can demonstrate what they know when they're assessed. Another thing to keep in mind is that a standards-based IEP is different from a traditional IEP in that it is developed through planning based on the student's grade level standards or grade level extended standards for most of us. In addition to academic goals, it will include life skills, communication, and therapy goals. Also, when planning standards-based IEPs, we want to focus on the priorities. What is most important for the student to learn now and in the future? There are many important things that students need to learn, but they don't all belong on the IEP. In other words, everything you teach students will not be on the IEP. The IEP creates access to the general education curriculum, but it is not a curriculum itself. Next, let's look at the steps for aligning IEPs to grade level. First, begin with a student-centered focus. You can do this by identifying the student's preferences. You can talk with parents and students themselves to identify the priorities. You can determine how the student will participate in the IEP planning process. Will they have a part in writing their goals? Will they participate in the IEP meeting? And maybe have a leadership role in the IEP meeting. It's important that we keep the I in IEP. The student themselves, I tell you what I like. I show you what I like. You observe patterns of my preferences, and my parents help you to know what I like. Next to the families, you are likely the person who knows your students best. Use that knowledge to build student preferences into the IEP goals. In this example, Kevin always enjoys hands-on science experiments, especially if there's a surprise reaction. His teacher decided to write a goal that says, Kevin will develop and display a science experiment. Some objectives she might include that consider his preferences could be that Kevin would learn the steps of the inquiry process. Kevin would try multiple experiments and select the one he wants to master. I really like that one because it builds in choice making for the student. Or that Kevin would develop and display his experiment at the school science fair. I really like that one too. That's where his peers would be. Next, we want to consider the grade level standards. These standards are for us in North Carolina are the NC Extended Standards, and they're located at the state's grade level. It's located at the link here in this PowerPoint. From when you explore these extended standards, you'll want to identify the ones that are most important for the learner. You could also talk to the general education teachers in your school to find out what they're teaching to help identify what's most important, and then make a list of the related skills needed for these priority standards. When we think about aligning our short-term objectives to the extended standards, 3 things are important to consider: the content, the context, and the performance that's required. Let me show you what I mean with this example. First, we have the grade level general education state standard. This one is from the 6th grade, and it describes what students should know and be able to do by the end of the 6th grade. This particular standard says that they will summarize the structure of the earth, including the layers, the mantle, and core, based on the relative position, composition, and density. All right. Next, we have the extended standard, and it's linked to the state standard, but less complex. For this example, it says, or for extended standard 6E1.1, that students will be able to identify the Earth's land features: mountains, valleys, volcanoes, and islands. All right. There are 3 pieces to the standard: the context, the content, and the performance. The context gives you an idea of where that instruction might happen. For us, it would be the science or ELA class, a virtual field trip perhaps, or even life experience. The content is what's being taught, or what's being assessed in the extended standard. And the performance says what the students do to show how they show what they know. In this instance, it's identify. So this teacher has written an objective for Kamala, and it says that Kamala will activate the switch to listen to a science story about land features. I want you to consider the context, the content, and the performance. Does this objective align with the extended standard? Let's think about the context. Activating a switch to listen to a science story about land features. Is there anything in there that leads you to believe that this is happening in science class or on a virtual field trip or life experience? I think no. I hope you agree with me. There's nothing in this objective that aligns with the context of the extended standard. How about the content, though? All right, so she's going to activate a switch to listen to a science story about landforms. Does that get at the content, which are land features of the Earth? Some of you may say, yes, maybe a little. I'm going to come on the no side, just because listening to a science story about land features doesn't sometimes help me learn about land features or be able to identify them, which is really the crucial performance needed here, that she identify them. So just listening about them being described likely won't help her identify them. And so that performance is off as well. Listening and identifying don't align. That's how you can write an objective that seemingly might get at the extended standard, but really is misaligned. And it leaves a lot to be desired as far as instruction goes. And even if Kamala could activate a switch to listen to a science story about land features, it's not getting at that extended standard of identifying Earth features. All right, so let's look at another example. Here's the same standards, the same extended standards, the same content, context, and performance, but a different objective. This one says, after reading a science chapter about land features of the Earth, Camilla will use pictures to identify land features, mountains, volcanoes, or valleys. Is the context there? I'm going to say yes, because we're reading a science chapter this time and not just listening to a story. I'm assuming that that's happening in science class. How about the content? Is the content there? Yes, it is. She's identifying land features using pictures, right? So it's getting at identifying which is the performance, identifying the Earth's land features. So this one's aligned in a much stronger fashion than the first example we looked at. And when she's able to do this, if she is when she is able to meet the criteria for this objective, she will have met or will have addressed that extended standard. All right, so let's apply what you've learned with this activity. You downloaded at the beginning of this training a Google Doc that has all of our handouts for this training, including the one you need for this activity. You want to find the alignment activity and open it up for this activity. You have 3 minutes to complete the activity. You're going to work in small groups, read the objectives in the assignment document, and decide if the context, the content, and the performance criteria are aligned to the extended standard that you're given. You'll circle yes or no to indicate your response and share your responses with the larger group. Facilitators, please pause the video for participants to complete this activity. Now let's talk about writing the annual goals for standards-based IEPs. First, you'll want to identify the priorities for each academic content area. Remember, these academic priorities must address each area of need described in the present levels. So if it says reading is a need, then there must be an annual goal for that. Math is a need, same there, okay? Some of these annual goals may link directly to the grade level standard. Others, however, may address multiple standards, such as communication, that goes across standards typically. And then all must be observable and measurable statements of performance that will be accomplished in a year, right? There's that in a year part. That's why we need these rigorous goals. And then conditions for performing the skill should be specified as well, such as if they need an adapted text or a read aloud. Now, here's some examples of goals that access the academic content standards, just to get your mind going in this direction. They could demonstrate academic learning using accommodations, such as, here's an annual goal, giving a communication board with scanning. Laura will use a switch to select correct answers from an array in reading, math, and science classes. Annual goals can also focus on the big ideas of grade level content, such as this annual goal. Given a writing template, Anna will summarize text from 3 different books by selecting and putting sentences in order. And then here's a final example that you can build on early literacy or numeracy skills within the grade level content, such as this one. When given a mathematical problem adapted from grade level, George will identify numbers under 10 and solve problems using manipulatives and a picture model. All right, so let's apply what you've learned with this activity. Find the annual goal activity from the Google Doc you downloaded at the beginning of the training. You'll have 5 minutes to complete this activity. I want you to think about a student in your class with extensive support needs, and then consider his or her present level in a content area. You can select reading, math, or science, and then the extended grade level standard, I'll spit it out here, the extended grade level standard for that content area and grade. All right, and the standards are linked, and now you have a link in your document that you can find. So if you want to select if reading is a area of need, go to your grade level reading extended content standards. Select one, and then write an annual goal for this learner that you have in your mind that's observable and measurable and something that can be accomplished in a year. Facilitators, please pause for students to complete this activity. Now, once you have the annual goals, you can write the specific short-term goals that are also called STOs or benchmarks. When writing STOs, consider how you will sequence them for learning. Will you teach the skill in chunks or altogether? For example, if the goal was to learn to count or is to learn to count with one-to-one correspondence to 10, will you teach first 1 to 3 to proficiency, and then teach 1 to 5, 1 to 8, and then finally 1 to 10? You could also teach counting 1 to 10 with one-to-one correspondence by teaching all those 1 to 10, but just change the accuracy required. So with 50% independent correct, 60%, 80%, 90%, and so on. How you sequence instruction depends on the learner and the skill you're teaching. You will also want to write objectives in observable and measurable terms. Consider the condition, behavior, and performance criteria for the objectives. Write the STOs in an active response that requires students to respond independently versus a passive response that relies on others, and plan for generalization. This is the graphic that describes the relationship between annual goals and objectives. Notice that the annual goal is at the top, and the objectives are the steps from getting where the student is to the goal. Now, this is an example of how objectives can be sequenced to achieve the goal. The goal here is, when given assorted text, Seth will identify the main idea and supporting details. The teacher has decided that she will teach these STOs likely simultaneously, because what she's doing is changing up what type of text Seth is summarizing and finding the supporting details for. So in the first one, it's adapted novels. The second one's informational text. And the third one is informational text in a science or social studies text. Okay, so that's one way to do it. I like this goal a lot, or I like this sequence a lot, because it allows you to teach these goals simultaneously, because you teach all of this in a week. You teach reading and you teach science, and you have informational text. Here's another example of how objectives can be organized to reach the goal. When given a problem-based math story, a set maker graphic organizer, and manipulatives, Cindy will solve addition problems to 10. Now, this teacher has decided that they will organize it or sequence it by having her first solve addition problems to 3, then go to addition problems to 5, addition problems to 7, and you've got it, addition problems to 10. So they're stepping it up that way, which is slightly different from what the last teacher did. Both are appropriate. However, you organize the objectives. All objectives must contain a condition, a behavior, and a criteria for mastery. The condition describes what is in place when the objective is taught and includes a description of the tools and resources available to the learner when performing the behavior or skill. Here's a couple of examples of the condition. When given adapted grade level science text and a text reader, okay, that says what's in place when this instruction is happening. Here's another one. When given a graphic organizer, or when given graphic organizers, such as a set maker or pattern maker, manipulatives, and problem-based math stories read aloud. Okay. Now, the behavior describes what the learner will do. The behavior describes one behavior and includes a verb. When writing the behavior, ask yourself if the verb you chose describes the type of behavior that the learner needs to display to reach the objective, to reach the goal, right? For example, if the annual goal is to describe, but the behavior is to identify, then even when the student masters the objective, the behavior doesn't get to the annual goal because the annual goal and the objective aren't aligned. We looked at that earlier, didn't we? Some behaviors are not observable and don't belong anywhere in an STO or an annual goal. Some examples are know, you can't really see that, understand, think, reason, learn. All of those behaviors are not observable. The performance criteria describes how well the behavior must be performed to meet the goal. So, for example, how often, how well, or how much. Here's a template for writing objectives that I found helpful when writing them. It just, you take the condition, the behavior, and the criteria, and you plug it in to this template to write a good, solid STO. Feel free to use that. Now let's apply what you've learned with this activity. Find the STO activity in the Google Doc you downloaded at the beginning of training. You'll have 3 minutes for this activity. We want you to identify the following parts of each STO. So you've got some STOs you've got some STOs to look at. We want you to identify the condition, the behavior, and the criteria. Right, see if you can pick them out. And then after identifying the STO parts, we want you to write one short-term objective for the annual goal that you wrote earlier in the activity just before this one. You're going to use both that annual goal and this STO in an activity at the end of this session. Facilitators, please pause the video for participants to complete this activity.